Thanks, Anthony. It's great to be here today. And before I introduce our awesome panelists, I thought it would be helpful to share a little more about what it means to be a modern seller. And to answer that question, we first need to look at what it means to be a modern buyer. Today's buyers have a number of challenges that impact their buying process, and by extension, it's created new challenges for salespeople. And one of those big challenges is the concept of a single decision maker has all but disappeared. There are more people involved than ever before. Now it's usually a buying committee. And that puts a lot of pressure on managing and coordinating key stakeholders, almost like you're running a campaign. And there's a ton of exchanges, there's interactions, and so much follow-up required. And that complexity is not only a lot more work, but it often leads to indecision and halted buying cycles. We've interviewed over 4,000 buyers, and our research shows that up to 70% of qualified opportunities, and those are deals where the sales rep has already successfully disrupted the status quo to help the customer get to this point in their process. And yet up to 70% of them end in a no decision when crossing from interest to making a real commitment. Buyers also have unprecedented choice. There's more ways than ever for them to reduce cost and improve productivity. And every buyer is dealing with constrained resources. And so even when our solutions promise greater productivity, those solutions might look more like extra work than they can actually take on. And buyers are inundated with information. And that's not just what they research on their own. It's also what's being pushed at them every day. So the reality is that today, most sellers are on the outside looking in versus actively navigating and supporting the forward movement of the buying journey. And this manifests itself as indecision, stalled deals, and extended sales cycles. And it's at an all-time high right now. It's certainly top of mind for everyone who's responsible for generating revenue. So what should we be doing about it? Well, I'd like to start with revenue enablement, my favorite topic. The role of enablement and enablement technology is really to introduce and support modern selling. And we're not just talking about sales, it's all customer-facing roles, enabling them to engage in and stay engaged across the entire buying journey lifecycle and create positive impact for the customer. And yet many methodologies and tactics that we've used for decades are proving no longer effective. And while we believe that technology is critical for a modern selling organization, technology itself is not enough. We can't just keep introducing the latest and greatest tools. What we need is a deliberate approach to leveraging technology that enables the modern seller and buyer. And technology can't just be about doing more. We need to make sure it's supporting doing the right things. So with this as a backdrop, there are two things we're going to spend time on our panel discussion today. Two really hot topics focused on technology-enabled selling that makes the difference between success or mediocre results on that path to enabling the modern seller. The first is integration, and the second is managing change. So let's dive in. Today, I'm joined by technology-enabled selling experts, Amy Figliuolo, who's the SVP, I got it right, I think, Amy.
You did.
SVP North America Enterprise at Salesloft, and Kristin Hagan, the VP of Global Partnerships at Seismic. Now, both Seismic and Salesloft address bringing greater efficiency and effectiveness to the equation of buying and selling, and in an integrated fashion. So let's start with our first discussion topic. Welcome, Kristin and Amy.
Thanks, Beverly.
Yeah, thanks, Beverly. And you pronounced it correctly, even with all those vowels. So thank you.
I was practicing. I didn't get it the authentic Italian way, but at least I got it the American way.
That's okay.
So our first question is about enabling efficiency and effectiveness for the modern seller, and specifically, what's required to ensure organizations are using technology to move both of these needles? Amy, how about we start with you?
Sure. I think, it's important to sort of almost define in a way how we think about efficiency and effectiveness. So, efficiency is about maximum production with minimum effort, and effectiveness is really about driving more outcomes while doing less in a lot of ways. And so what I really think we're talking about here is how do we make salespeople more productive, especially when a lot of companies have, less reps in the field, but are still expected to hit very aggressive revenue targets. But putting a pin in that for a second. So, we're not really making it easy on salespeople. We hear it all the time. I'm not talking about anything that, everybody else isn't already talking about or thinking about with tech bloat and tech sprawl and, siloed, disparate systems that make it really difficult for reps to do their jobs effectively using those tools. And it's ironic to me because the same systems and tools and platforms that, we're giving to our salespeople to make them more productive and make them more efficient and make them more effective. In a lot of cases, it's actually having the opposite effect because it's pulling them in so many different directions that oftentimes they find themselves just kind of, really not using them at all. And so we have reps that are, operating off of instinct versus data and insights. And, I think a good example of this is a customer that I met with the other day that they actually shared their screen and showed us their Okta. They have 90 applications for their reps to use. And so what ends up happening is no one really is using any of them. And so I think once you've simplified and consolidated your tech stack, it really then becomes about enablement and specifically tech enablement, because that's different than, oftentimes what we think about in terms of, training and onboarding and enablement. It's actually around the technology itself and making sure that you have subject matter experts within your organization that really understand the technology, that are, really the ones that are sort of shepherding it into the organization and making sure that it's being adopted and utilized on an ongoing basis. And I think a really good example of this is that, we're seeing a role, it's a newer role that I've seen, which is head of technology enablement. So it seems like bigger, more sophisticated, more complex organizations are realizing that they can't just take their kind of traditional approach to enablement, and that it's especially important to have somebody that's really thinking about technology and how we enable, big organizations on that technology.
I love that. So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about a role that's focused on really making sure that you're reaching your goals, that it's not just put in and the tech's all set up and it's running perfectly, but no one's using it. They're thinking about it holistically. So a role really focused on that. That's great. That's great. What about you, Kristin? We've talked a little bit about making things more efficient and the importance of effectiveness. But what does it take to really make them better, more effective?
Yeah, so I would say the more effective sellers we've definitely seen focus on actions that drive those outcomes, right? And so Amy hit the nail on the head there, right? Like when you think about effectiveness, it's really driving outcomes. For reps, that's typically closed business, right? So what are the activities that are helping to enable our reps to close business, right? And I mean, our globally speaking, not just ours, but I think across the board, what we're seeing is really it's keeping them where they live. So less distractions, to what you're saying, Amy. So not as much head swiveling between applications, but keeping them in focused in what they need to do. So using maybe our technology as an example, right? Think if we were sending a DSR via Seismic, right? We then want to be able to make sure that that's being a digital sales room. Thank you so much. My acronym usage. But sending a digital sales room to a prospect and then being able to maybe have it to 20 different prospects. How do you know who's looking at it, right? And how do you make sure that you can track the analytics? We actually integrate with Salesloft, right? And their rhythm, their new product rhythm. And you can actually prioritize at the top of your Salesloft, seeing things like someone who's viewed Seismic the DSR from Seismic multiple times, and be able to prioritize those types of interactions as opposed to working on interactions from everyone that's maybe not having the desired outcome that you're looking for. And so being able to prioritize and be more efficient, we're really seeing leading to increased effectiveness in terms of outcomes, results, better deals, bigger deals, closing deals, things like that, what we're all driving toward. I think that's really what it is. So keeping the sellers where they need to focus and and really then bringing it home with focus on the right activities within those tools.
I'm just going to pick up on a point you just made that I think is really important, is it's doing the right things, not just doing more. And Amy, you even said it. You said, in some ways it's doing less. And, that doesn't sound very appealing, for a lot of leaders who would be making investments in technology. But if we're doing more of the right things instead of just doing more, that's really where the effectiveness equation comes into play. So what I'm hearing is that we need both, and the efficiency pieces are going to focus on reducing things like cost, streamlining our processes, and in some ways it can help people do more faster. But what's really important is that we don't miss the effectiveness equation, because that looks at what the right customer-centric activities and behaviors are that are going to really lead to greater revenue and higher impact for customers. So let's talk about integration. Did you have another comment, Kristin?
Oh, I was just going to say, Beverly, I think that's a really interesting point, and I can touch on it in integrations, but I was going to say the other piece of it is having your reps be able to pivot their narrative too, right? Like when you're thinking about efficiency and effectiveness, like being able to pivot on a dime and having both the tech enablement, but also just the enablement to know a narrative that can be changing, because right now what we're seeing is the ICP shift, right? Like I think that's the other big piece. And that is really causing the need to be able to not just sell to who's typically your buyer, but like a shift in who the buyer may be.
That's really interesting. Really great point. And I think we want to talk a little bit about that in integration, because part of what integration is going to do is give us access to data that helps us make those pivots far more quickly to use the right narrative in the right moment. So let's talk about integration. What does integration mean in the modern sales organization? Kristin, do you want to kick us off here? I think it's a hot topic.
Integrations is one of my favorite areas. So one of the biggest things in my role is working with our partners that build integrations. It's a Seismic, or where we're building integrations to their technology. And one of the things that we realize is it's less about, when we think about consolidation, it's less about someone thinking, how do I have less technology? But it's more, how do I integrate this technology in a way that it feels seamless? Because the better integrated technology is, right, that can lead to valuable data that can then be used across an organization, right? If, let's say 5-10 years ago, some of these tools would be used in complete silos, right, in each of the organizations. And you wouldn't be able to then utilize that data across the company to be able to see any sort of customer 360. So leveraging tools that are then able to cross-pollinate very easily, there can be things that are seen right away. Maybe it's something that happens in an upsell. The CSM really has input on it. So you can share that data really quickly and effectively. It also then can help with things around AI. Like we're all talking AI these days, right? But predictive analytics, how can you then integrate a tool that can help you get ready for potentially a meeting, and then also give you the best next action after that? It's really just the content, the training, all of those pieces, if they're integrated together and being able to drive better outcomes, it takes you back to your first point, Beverly, which is the outcomes and the effectiveness. Like ultimately, that's what we're driving toward, and that's what we want with those integrations.
So I think that's a really important point that you're making around the integration of the technology itself. Like those tools, those 90 tools, hopefully there's not 90, but that they need to talk to one another. They need to be able to speak the same language. And we also want to make sure that they're integrated into the workflow of how a seller works, where they live. Talk to me a little bit more, maybe, Amy, about what you're seeing and what integration means to you for modern sellers.
Yeah. Integration for me is about the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. And like I mentioned before, sellers are really overwhelmed with the amount of tech that they're expected to use today. And it's really hard to drive the adoption, like we talked about before, when there's so much technology to adopt. But when you have these, complementary pieces of technology working together, and you're able to bring it together in the seller's workflow, then the picture that you get of the customer, or, as a sales leader, of a particular deal, right? Let's say a deal that we're forecasting, when I'm able to see all of the interactions that we've had with that customer, and I'm also able to look at intent data, and I'm also able to look at deal scores and all kinds of information, and AI as well, to Kristin's point, then we really start to make the technology work for people, right? And sort of bringing those signals and those insights to the rep instead of making them go out and find them. One of those signals is a signal like Seismic, right? And what is the engagement that, a particular piece of content that maybe you've sent to a prospect, rather than making you, log into Seismic or, get an email, actually having that, brought to you in your workflow. And so I think that that's really what the key is data is really hard to action on if it's not in the workflow. And that's just something that, we feel strongly about at Salesloft.
So organizations that aren't necessarily doing this yet, what advice would you have for them?
I mean, I really do think that you have to look for pieces of technology that automatically can work together and already have a lot of those pre-built integrations out of the box. And you need to think about really consolidating and finding, a platform that can help you get there, so that you can start to, instead of having these siloed systems and, having conversations in one platform, and you're forecasting in another, and not having those two things really integrated together, you're sort of doing yourself a disadvantage in having those different, because all those things are really important when you're thinking about a deal, and when you're trying to really understand, is your AE perceiving reality correctly or not, right? Like that's a lot of what a first line leader's role is, right? Is to make sure that the AE is perceiving reality correctly. And so, when you have these things living in different places, it just makes it really difficult to be able to tell that story and really get a good understanding of what's actually happening.
I think you're making also a really important point about approaching this more holistically. And when we think about this, it goes beyond just the AE and their frontline manager. It also is something that we need to be thinking about across the entire customer-facing team.
Absolutely.
So if we do this well, what does that look like?
Would you like me to? Oh, go for it, Kristin.
Either of you, I'd love your thoughts. What does that look like if you do it well across all customer-facing roles?
I mean, if you do it well across all customer-facing roles, I would say the narrative would be effective and utilized across all of those teams, right? Like if you're thinking about it, right, where you have an integrated approach to technology and data, you're going to know what's effective in your sales, right? And that's from like a sales methodology, from the narrative that you're sharing. And then it's also the approach on a post sale, right? So you have kind of all of those elements to be able to get the feedback loop because everything's integrated. And so I like to think of it, it's not a sales cycle that ends at post sale. It's a sales cycle that continues, right? And so having the customer success element of it, and the support, and everyone that can continue, I'm using my hands a lot on this, but it's that cycle that continuously flows. And it's the data and the technology integrations that support that flow of data. And I think that's the biggest piece that I think really can lead to success, but also missed opportunity, right? If there's a stop in some of that, that's where you can start to see the downstream effects of it.
So well said, because integration not only is a better user experience, right? But it also provides far more effective data capture because you're integrated across the entire customer buying journey. And that helps all our customer facing teams get to more effective, actionable insights far more quickly than if these tools and processes are not integrated. So integration includes technology across the tech stack into the flow of work, as well as making sure that we're integrating across the end-to-end buying journey lifecycle. Brilliant. That's awesome. Let's talk about change now. So everything we've discussed so far is really representing probably a significant change for many organizations today and how customer-facing teams are using technology. And even though tech can make our jobs easier, and we believe it will create more effective customer engagement, we see that many organizations still struggle to adopt modern selling approaches. And in fact, some of the data shows that up to 70% of digital transformations are missing the mark. So managing this change is super important. So Amy, Kristin, what are you seeing successful organizations do to promote adoption?
Yeah, I think, you know, the good news is if salespeople find value in what you're providing, the adoption will happen. But, you know, how do you get them bought in to try it and really change their day-to-day? And I think, you know, it starts really from the top initially, right? So, you know, actually getting ELT level support when you're initially rolling out a new piece of technology, or you are, you know, trying to affect change within the organization. It's
That's pretty senior, Amy. Do you really need ELT support?
Do you want to really drive the adoption, and do you want your team to really understand that the company is making a huge investment in making them more successful and in making the company more successful? And it really does need to come from the top. And so that's, you know, that's one of the first things I think is really important, is to make sure that you're getting that level of support. And it can be, you know, it can be an email, you know, to the team, basically saying, we bought this and this is what we're expecting it to do for us. And that, you know, we expect people to use it. Right. So I think that's first and foremost. And then I think, you know, AEs in particular will look to their peers to see if they're finding success with it, and not just anyone. You know, they're going to look to influential, high-performing reps. And so it's really important to cultivate those relationships, find out, you know, who are the top performing reps at the company, and sort of create a subset of those users and try to get them bought in, and really try to create the adoption there, because their voice is heard in a big way. And then, you know, the real key, I think, to driving adoption is unlocking the first line leaders. They are really the key to driving this forward. And, you know, it's about the expectation that they set with their teams, and really trying to make them champions of the technology, and making sure that, you know, they really believe in it, and that they're going to hold their teams accountable to using it. And at that point, it's, you know, starts to become more tactical in nature around scorecarding, and even, you know, going kind of foxhole by foxhole and reaching out to individual AEs, or, you know, whoever the user might be. If they're not leveraging the technology, reaching out to them and asking them, you know, is it a matter of not logging in? Is it a matter of needing more training? You know, we're not afraid to get our hands dirty, and, you know, reach out to individuals and make sure that they're getting what they need.
That's really important point you brought up around, I think, frontline sales managers as well. It's often overlooked, and the importance of their role in really driving the behavior change. You know, you didn't mention inspection. You did talk about scorecards though, but what about inspection? How important do you think that is in driving the change?
When you say inspection, what do you mean by that?
Frontline sales managers inspecting that things are actually happening as they should.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's really important to be looking at, again, the data, right? You know, how is the rep spending their time? Are they prospecting? You know, I think for a lot of companies, for us to hit our targets, we have to be winning new logo business, right? Like if we're relying on our ability to upsell and cross-sell just our existing customer base, we're going to struggle like a lot of companies, right? And so it's about growing our market share, and it's about landing new logos. And so a lot of that, it's not the prettiest part of sales, but prospecting is really, really important, and hunting is really important. And so making sure that you understand how your AEs are spending their time, and then also helping to make them more effective in the job, like we talked about before, and really truly doing, the right coaching and understanding, do they have their narrative down, and do they really understand what the customer's pain points are, and are they able to get to the bottom of if they're really solving a critical problem for that customer. And so I think all of that at the end of the day does come back to inspection.
Really, really insightful. And I love that comment around the using the data, because the data will help us see what's really happening. So not just leaving it to chance or, guessing. We now have access to data to really see what's happening on that change curve. What about you, Kristin? I'd love your thoughts on, what we talked a little bit about what we should be doing, but what are some of the things you definitely don't want to do when you're implementing technology?
I think, there's always a hypothesis when you're implementing new technology on what you're going to drive by using this technology. But you really don't want to be guessing how well you're doing 3, 6, 12 months in, right? You want to be able to look at a technology that you're implementing and say, these are the metrics of success I want to drive out of it, right? Like I want to make it so deal reviews can be more effective, right? I want to make it so forecasting can be done in a more efficient manner, right? You want to use toolings that are driving the efficiency and effectiveness, right? And so you want to be able to know the ROI that you're anticipating out of a tool and have metrics. You can shift those over time, and you can even see more, right? Like you can get into additional metrics of success, but ultimately you need to be able to put an ROI on technology. And I don't know that in years past, there's been that really drive to understand the value of a technology and what it's doing to help in terms of the overall sales cycle. Is it, reducing time for your sellers? Is it helping to make them more efficient in deal reviews? Is it helping on all of those pieces that we're talking about? And I think that piece of it and the ROI and the value is so much more critical than it's been, and more evaluated, right? When you're talking about inspection, I think the buyers are inspecting that in a whole other way than what's gone on in the past. So what not to do? Don't go in thinking that you're going to be able to just rest on your laurels, right? I always say the status quo is what can be the killer, right? And so making sure that you're understanding truly the value that a technology provides, both in terms of using it yourself in your company and when you're buying new technology and selling.
I think it's so important what the point that you're making around not leaving it to chance. And also, it's something you didn't exactly say this, but I think you were getting at it, was it's important to understand the why. Because if you don't know why you're doing it, then how do you know what a return on investment, a good return on investment, really means for your organization? So starting with that why, not leaving that to chance, making sure that it comes through in your communication, comes through in the training that you do, promoting those opportunities, like Amy said, when you've got peers who are getting the right results, and really, sharing that, especially in peer-to-peer. It has such a high impact when it's coming from people who look like them in their same kinds of roles. I think your point as well about ELT is important. And I think it's probably more than just an email. I mean, that's an easy thing to do, right? It's walking the walk and talking the talk. And ELT can actually play a really important role here, in really making sure that people say, hey, this isn't just another tool they're throwing out here. This is something that is becoming part of our DNA, becoming part of how we show up for our customers. And then of course,
Totally agree. but you have to really mean it too, right? So if you're gonna
100%.
put it out there and you're gonna say this is gonna become a part of our DNA, then it has to actually become a part of your DNA. Because you know, it's like if you tell your kids that they're, you know, if they don't get their homework done, you're gonna take something away. And if you create a pattern of not following through on the things that you say you're going to, then, you know, no one's going to believe you, right? So just, I totally agree with you on that, but I do think it's really important that if you're going to put a stake in the ground and say, this is the way we're going to do things moving forward, you really got to mean it, and then you got to follow it through.
I've thrown away toys. I have done it. I will say that I'm the person when there was fighting over it. I had twins. I threw away toys. We didn't fight over toys for a while. So I think it's the same, right? How to get everyone to play nice in the sandbox, right?
A lot of lessons in parenting that can be brought to business for sure.
That's right.
All right. So if we're doing all the right things, we're integrating technology, we're supporting the necessary change, what can we expect the results to look like for our customer facing teams?
I mean, from our perspective at Salesloft, I think the value that we can provide can vary so much, depending on the organization, depending on their go-to-market. You know, we have a pretty robust value engineering practice at Salesloft. And, you know, ahead of an engagement, you know, we will spend time with their sales reps. We will look at how they're doing things today, and we'll get pretty specific on how much more efficient and effective we think we can make those sales teams. And we sort of do an analysis ahead of an engagement. And then, you know, once we've been able to, you know, bring a customer on board, then we do, after about 6 months, we'll do a value realization study to basically see, you know, how well are we doing in relation to what we said we were going to do. And honestly, Bev, those, you know, those results can vary so much. You know, we just ran a pilot with a company that saw, you know, a 300% increase in opportunities for more meetings being generated. And, you know, that is incredible and very exciting. But at the same time, you know, we'll see other organizations that, you know, maybe we're able to move the needle 25%, right? Which is still, you know, meaningful, right? It's still meaningful, but it can just vary so much. But what we are seeing is with, you know, with Rhythm, which Kristin mentioned earlier, which is basically, and, you know, again, it's a prioritized workflow looking at partner signals and intent data and analytics data that we have in Salesloft, basically creating a prioritized workflow for salespeople. So, you know, when you think about workflow, right, and whatever that means for you, you know, we're seeing huge benefits from, you know, customers producing, you know, one customer is producing 62% more meetings while doing fewer activities in Salesloft. So I think that's really interesting, right? I know we talked about before that, you know, in a perfect world, right, everybody's doing more, but in some cases it might be about doing less, but still being able to drive, you know, the results that you want. Another customer is doing 53% fewer activities, but booking 44% more meetings. And again, it's back to getting the tech working for you. And it's about bringing the tech to the user versus forcing them to go out and find this information. So
that's
no.
Yeah.
I was just going to comment that I think it makes so much sense that when you're thinking about the results, it really goes back to that why. Like, what are we trying to achieve? What is important to our organization? Where are we today? And so, you know, sometimes like even a 1% difference could be a massive change.
sure.
You know, 300% sounds amazing, but it really is all about what you're trying to do within your own organization on this path to modern selling. Kristin, what were you going to add?
I was going to say, over the past week, I've had a few partners and their sales leaders show me dashboards of effectiveness, right? And inside their dashboards are showing integrated tools and being able to see how their reps are performing based upon things like how many calls, activities, like the standard things that we've looked at, right? But then some of these leaders have shown, okay, well, this rep is really effective, and they're sending, they've had 3,000 pieces of content shared, right? And you can see analytics from that, via Seismic and things. But it's really the ability to see all of that, because part of it would only give you one picture. But seeing all of the data together can give you the picture of why some people are performing well and why some aren't. But also that piece of how do you make it so that it's better in a situation where it's not always do more to be better, right? And so some of that is thinking about, back to saying integrations. What we're seeing is value realization is higher in integrated solutions. And you can drive customer retention by having solutions integrated in a fashion that drives customer retention. So really companies that are utilizing, and again, this is a big piece, utilizing integrations between providers where there is a significant value that's added by having a solution together. The value realization by customers is so significant that even in examples of like high utilization between Seismic and Salesloft, 100% of customers who do that are staying between us, right? Like that's 100% retention on customers that are utilizing that integration. So just think about that. That means they're finding that much value out of an integration, and there's a high utilization there. So I think that understanding it's not just, okay, that's great, they're sticking with us. It's really that they're finding the value. And I think that's really important to think about when you're integrating with another solution. How does this add value to my solution and to what the customers are trying to do? So think about it as the customer. What are you adding value to them with a joint solution? And I think ultimately that's how we're just going to get better and more effective. And even then taking it to the AI piece, which is how can we then add that into this, and having more of the integrations is going to make for us to have better tooling that enables us to have better AI as well.
That's what it's all about, is that are we delivering value and having impact for our customers? And I couldn't have said it better. Nicely said, Kristin. I know that we want to get to some Q&A here and open that up to the chat. So I'm going to leave you with one question here that I'd love your thoughts on. If there's anyone out here still on the fence thinking about, is this really worth doing? What would you say is imperative about enabling modern selling?
I'll say one thing that just kind of popped into my head, but I'm a salesperson at heart, right? And what I find interesting is, salespeople, they have a certain expectation of how you're going to support them. And so what I would say is, if you are going to hire the very best, in my case, let's say enterprise sales professionals that are out there, they're going to expect to have systems like Seismic at their disposal, and Salesloft and Salesforce, and a whole host of other pieces of technology that make them more effective at their jobs. And so I think it starts to come back to, it's around how you're recruiting even, right? And so the enabling the seller to be effective with technology, and the kind of technology that you have at their disposal becomes a factor in whether or not they want to actually come work at your organization. It's a reflection on your company and how seriously you take supporting your sales team. And so I think it's table stakes.
That's really cool. Thinking about it as just even a recruiting tool. Do you have the right tools that I can be successful in my job? Love it. What about you, Kristin?
I've been in a situation where I didn't have the right tools, or didn't have tools that were taking away my efficiencies, right? So decreasing my efficiencies. And I feel like when you're in a situation like that, and then you come back and you see tools that can really help with your efficiency, I think ultimately what you get is the ability to realize the value and how important it is in the trajectory of not just your success, but also the company, right? And so I do agree that it's table stakes to have the right tooling for the modern sellers, and not really thinking of it as this is a nice to have, but it's a need to have. And not just for the sellers, but I think the biggest piece is making sure that you have it for the go-to-market teams, right? And having it across the board, and really trying to leverage the tooling for, you know, kind of as many of the teams that it makes sense for, so that you have that consistency.
All customer facing roles. We have to think about that as a revenue generating engine for the company, not just getting that initial deal. So these tools can really help not just modernize our approach, but really accelerate time to customer impact. And I would also say that, you know, just kind of adding on to this, if you're not doing this, your competitors likely are. So it's not even, you know, about differentiation. It's survival in some cases, but certainly the differentiation can come when you're doing these other things: integration, change management, focusing on the results, driving the right behaviors, training and enabling your people appropriately, investing in technology enabled selling. These are the things that really can differentiate you in the market. So I'm going to pause here right now to make space for our Q&A with the webinar attendees and